Dear friends, warm welcome from the European Movement Office here in Brussels. We are delighted to have you with us for another event, this time held in partnership with the European Council of Foreign Relations, one of the prominent think tanks with a presence across Europe. This is a new partnership between the European Movement and the ECFR with the intention of highlighting some of the key issues currently debated in the EU and bringing together stakeholders from across the board, the institutions, academia, civil society, and beyond to find a way to address those big issues. And what better way to start this partnership and this series of events than to discuss something that is really high on the agenda at the moment, both here in Brussels, but across the European Union and the world, of course. And that is the question of digital sovereignty, and in particular, the EU's digital sovereignty. There is a big debate out there that evolves around how can we actually be digitally sovereign, and we have the opportunity to discuss this with two very prominent experts in this particular area. Before I introduce, though, our speakers, I'd like to invite you to watch a short video from our president, Ms. Eva Maidel, MEP, who unfortunately couldn't be here with us, but she's going to offer a few words as a welcome. Thank you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's joint discussion between the European Movement International and the European Council of Foreign Relations on digital sovereignty. In the past couple of months, we have noticed that digital sovereignty has become a buzzword within the EU. But there are still many unanswered questions on what exactly it means, how should the EU go about it. So in my brief opening remarks, I would like to point out two aspects of this sovereignty. And what I would like to share with you is a little bit on strategic autonomy as well as on technological leadership. To me, strategic autonomy is not about being protectionist, but being a master of your own destiny. After all, we are a trade-oriented union, and the pandemic showed that crises in different sectors and in supply chain, for example, for medical equipment or semiconductors, can lead to disruption in the lives of many Europeans. So, in a way, there are political decisions we can take to address these issues. Whether that's through ensuring production or through diversifying supply chain, but the important part is that we have to act, and we have to sometimes act in a bold manner and not be afraid to take those political decisions. And this leads me now to briefly illustrate my second point. I think that while striving for digital sovereignty, we must also make sure that we go into the right directions and take the right step to become technological leaders. This means that we must build and maintain technical and scientific competences in key technologies. On the other hand, it also means that we need to continue working with our global partners who share our values. Because in the end of the day, technological leadership is not a zero-sum game, but an endeavor to create a thriving and prosperous ecosystem for European entrepreneurs. So these are just two of the reasons why I think today's topic is a crucial one. And I'm very glad that the European Movement International and ECFR are discussing it together. So from my side, I wish you a very fruitful exchange, and I look forward to hearing about the outcome of today's event. Esther, success.
Wonderful. That's a great way to start the discussion. And I know Eva wanted to be here, but unfortunately she couldn't, but I think she has framed what's going to follow very well. And to do that, we have with us two distinguished experts. First of all, Roberto Viola, who is the Director General of DG Connect from the European Commission. Mr. Viola, Roberto, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. And on the other side, we have Ulrike Esther Franke. She's the Senior Policy Fellow of the European Council of Foreign Relations, and she's currently joining us from London. Thank you very much, and welcome to both of you for coming along. Perhaps I can start with you, Roberto. As I mentioned at the beginning, the EU's digital sovereignty is very high on the agenda, both in Brussels, but also in capitals across the EU. And for that reason, the European Commission has been undertaking quite a lot of work in that area. Could you perhaps highlight some of the initiatives that the Commission is currently undertaking so we can then discuss the objectives that we're trying to meet?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. It's really a pleasure to be here and discuss this very important topic. So I like to start joining the words of Eva Maidel in the clip we have seen in the introduction of this chat. She said digital sovereignty is not about, building Fortress Europe, and I cannot agree more. And she mentioned disruption in value chains, production chains in Europe due to the shortage of digital supply. And I think this is something we cannot afford. It's a scenario we cannot contemplate. It's a way that cannot be the European way to digital. I think we have set very clearly the path for the next 10 years. And that's the first thing that I like to say. I mean, the European Commission has presented what we call the digital compass, which is, if you like, the instrument to navigate the next 10 years of digital, which is made of 4 cardinal points, which is the people, so more skills. It's the infrastructure, technological infrastructure, connectivity infrastructure. It's the industry, so scaling up the industry, making sure the industry uses more digital tools. And of course, the administration, to make sure that the administration is at the service of the citizens and not the other way around. So in this respect, there's been a series of important legislative reforms that have been proposed. First of all, in the way the internet functions with the two twins, which are the Digital Service Act and the Digital Market Act. Last week, we presented our regulation on artificial intelligence. We'll continue enforcing the rules we have already presented, and very soon we will present our legal proposal for the European digital identity. And of course, we are working hard also on data governance, as you know. So this is the regulatory side, where we will try to foster the model of human-centric digital development. But then, of course, it's not about rules, only about rules. It's about, funding the recovery, and that's the recovery plan, where 20% of the investment will be dedicated to digital. We are in the days where the member states are finalizing the draft recovery plans. And indeed, this digital investment have been taken very seriously everywhere in Europe. And this is a very good sign. And of course, also supplementing the investment in the recovery fund with the union level investment with a brand new program, which is the Digital Europe program dedicated to supercomputing, artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, and also partnership with the member states. And that's what makes, this path towards a more resilient Europe, not just something we write on paper, but I think something very concrete.
Fantastic. That is indeed quite interesting. And I think you touched upon a few elements there that perhaps I can probe a bit further before we move to Ulrike, because obviously the question of skilling up the population is quite important. We need to make sure that our fellow citizens are able to make the most of the opportunities that the new digital revolution is bringing along. But I thought I would also like to perhaps explore a bit more the question of the investment that we need to make to ensure that the EU, our businesses, our governments, and our citizens are there. Could you give us a few more details on that aspect, the investment for digital skilling up, but also for the infrastructure necessary for us to be sovereign digitally?
Well, first of all, maybe I can give you a little bit the flavor of what are the targets we are setting for skilling up. In the digital decade, we have set the target that by 2030, there should be at least 20 million ICT specialists in Europe. We are now at 7, roughly. So ICT specialists in the future probably are never enough. And ahead of us, there's quite a long journey to double this number and even triple this number, as a matter of fact. So this means that digital skills is not just something nice to have, it's a must to have. In the Digital Europe program, we have investment for something like a little bit less than 1 billion in advanced skills, which is quite an important investment. as a matter of fact, in terms of advanced skill, is an unprecedented investment. And this will be dedicated in federating many high education institutions in Europe to create new master courses, to create new partnership with the industry, to make sure that really we have a new generation of very high skilled professionals. And of course, also discussing with the partners around the world how to, in general, lift up the skills. So not only, again, an ambition, but concrete investments from the European side. And then, of course, I mean, in every national plan, the dimension of skills is very present with the associated investments. Perhaps even more should be done, but the start is not bad. For what concerns industry, our target is that, especially looking at the high end of industry, we have a usage of AI, big data, which will go to almost 80% of all industries and companies, and for lower technology companies to break up the ice and really start embracing this technology. The investments are, as I said, important investment that I witnessing in the national recovery plans. And, we are talking about a very important amount of money, because it's roughly speaking 150 billion, which is, I mean, as an order of magnitude, what has been spent could be spent in 70 years of the EU budget. So this is important amount of money. And when it comes to industry, we'll go in schemes to adopt AI, schemes to adopt and use data, embracing cloud and edge computing. It will go in the direction of creating digital innovation hubs where lower skilled companies can work with high skilled companies and with learning institutions such as universities to create co-working space and co-investment space for high tech.
Thank you very much. And I mean, this goes a long way to show the investment and the effort that the European Union in general, the European Commission in particular, in making in this. And I think without the leadership of the Commission, it will be difficult to achieve our targets. Ulrike, if I can come to you, and of course, you're more than welcome to comment anything that Mr. Viola has mentioned, but perhaps I can start with asking you a bit to comment on the geopolitical aspects of the debate around digital sovereignty. You know, the EU is squeezed between two giants, the US on the one side with its dominance and the technological advances in that area, some might say not regulated enough, and on the other side, China, equally advanced with a very ambitious agenda, but also with a different agenda based on different perhaps values than those we have here in Europe. How can the EU find its way between those two giants in an effort to achieve the digital sovereignty we're discussing about?
Yes, thank you very much for that question, and a wonderful good morning to everyone from London. Thanks so much for organizing this debate or partnering with ECFR in this debate, because I really think it's important that we, basically put more meat on the bones, if you like, of digital sovereignty, especially because you may know that the discussion on strategic autonomy, strategic sovereignty that the EU is also having at the same time, and of which digital sovereignty is a part. This discussion is a bit stuck. It's a bit stuck on, terminology and things like that. So I'm really glad that we can discuss one element, the digital, the technological element here today. So at ECFR, I have the pleasure of leading the Technology and European Power Initiative, as we are calling it. And our focus and my focus really is on the external dimension, the external consequences and the geopolitical consequences of Europe's action and indeed inaction on others, on partners, on third parties, etc., and on its own geopolitical standing. And that's exactly the kind of the first point I want to make to kick this discussion off, and I'll just make two very brief points. The first is that
I really think it's absolutely crucial that the EU, but also the member states, many of which tend to not do that at all, really consider the external dimensions, the external consequences of their action, and again, also inaction on technology development, adoption, and regulation, which of course is a very important topic for the European Union. And for me, kind of thinking about this really has two elements. The first is, the consequences, some of which, may be unintentional, the consequences of anything that the EU does, especially when it comes to regulation, on others, on partners and allies on the one hand, on opponents on the other, and also on third countries. What is it that we can offer third countries, for example, in the developing world? And then also very, very importantly, the geopolitical element and the power element, if you like. Now, the EU as an organization, as we're all very aware of, is generally rather uncomfortable thinking about geopolitics in terms of power. Partly that has to do with its competencies, but also I think there's a general unease to do this. And several EU member states also aren't really doing this, partly because they're relatively small and it's not quite in their DNA either. But, and this is really kind of my main message, the technological is geopolitical. And it really isn't good enough to think about technology or see technology through an economic lens. We tend to do this. I think sometimes Europeans kind of like to hide behind the idea that, it's about, economic interest and sometimes societal impact. But there is a geopolitical element there, even if we don't want to acknowledge it. And you just mentioned the kind of competition between China and the United States. Now, to be very clear, I'm not saying that EU or Europeans should kind of enter what has been called, and I think not very helpfully, a kind of technological race, especially an AI race between China and the US. But again, this is an aspect that we kind of, while addressing these things, we need to keep in mind. And that, by the way, that's kind of the second part of my message on this first point, that also includes the military and defense aspects. The military and defense aspects of emerging technologies, and I personally work primarily on artificial intelligence, but there are also other emerging technologies that play a role. That's something that the EU as an organization tends to not really discuss, again, partly because of the competencies it has, but also because it doesn't really like to do that. But also member states, most European member states, in fact, don't really, at least publicly, think about or write about or say anything about the military implications of AI, of emerging technologies. And I think this may come back to haunt us. So that was the kind of my first point. And if I may, very, very briefly, because again, it kind of puts a bit more meat on the bones, if you like, and makes this less abstract. There's one element, and you refer to values, the importance of kind of European values. There's one element and one, I would say, value that the Europeans have and value, maybe more than other actors. And that is this element of data privacy and privacy in general. And I just really want to say to everyone who is listening here today, just how important it is for the EU, for Europeans to keep the focus on data privacy and not kind of abandon this idea because it may seem, hindering innovation. That's something that we hear sometime. And you may be surprised that I kind of emphasize this as much, given that, for instance, the AI regulation that just came out very much emphasized this point. It's just that in recent discussions, I've heard one too many times relatively high-level European politicians talk about, the fetishization of data privacy, of data security in Europe, and this argument that somehow it's hindering innovation. And I would be very, very careful with this argument. Now, not too long ago, we actually had another ECFR discussion on this specific topic, and this was a kind of public event where the audience could vote. And I was quite happy to see that the majority of the audience that joined this particular event on data privacy was indeed very much in favor of data privacy. And also the Munich Security Conference put out a poll not too long ago that found that 34% of Europeans said that not only do they value privacy, which everyone always says when they're being asked, but they said, we value this and we would be willing to pay more for more secure systems, more secure networks, more data privacy. And I think this is actually, very, very good news. So it's not just lip service and a kind of nice to have. So basically what I'm saying is, on the second point of privacy and data security, it is popular among Europeans. Of course, not everyone cares, but I think it is popular among Europeans. So that's one reason to keep it. Secondly, and I would argue most importantly, it's right. It's a good idea. If you think about the problems that surveillance capitalism has been causing, I think it's a very good idea to try to keep data as private as possible. And then third, kind of as an incentive for the EU and for policymakers, I really do believe that a focus, an emphasis on privacy will become, and to some extent already is, a location advantage for the European Union. The European Union, since GDPR, is known for being a union, a geographical area where data privacy is guaranteed as much as possible. And I think that the more people around the world realize what bad you can do with the data that is being collected, the more people will see this kind of regulation as something that they want and as something that they aspire to, and as something that they would like to adopt as well. So again, my kind of plea not to abandon this now, when I think more and more people are coming around and emphasizing how important this is. So yeah, two elements: geopolitical importance needs to be kept in mind, and data security is crucially important. And these are two things that I kind of want to discuss more in the realm of digital sovereignty. And if you want to talk about the military aspect, I'm always happy to do that.
I think we're going to come back to that, because I think it's an important point that you made. Perhaps if I can go back to Roberto, and there is a lot of things can be said about the EU, but in terms of regulation and setting standards, the EU is a giant indeed. And Ulrike mentioned that when she was saying, and this is something we can use to our advantage, obviously. So maybe I would like to touch a little bit more on that regulatory framework that the EU is putting in place, both to make the most of the opportunities that the digital realm and AI produce, but also to safeguard citizens' rights, human rights in general, in this new world. Could you give us a few more details about that regulatory framework?
Yes, with pleasure. As I said in my, when replying to your first question, we actually have a set of rules which give flesh to the bones of the idea of human-centered digital innovation. Of course, we can mention GDPR, which is about data protection, but then we have rules in Europe about the freedom of the internet, net neutrality. We are the only large area in the world that has very clear rules on the openness of internet. We have recently introduced these rules on how the legality should be treated online. And when the rule is very simple in a way, I mean, what is illegal offline is illegal online, and there should be no company, how big is the company doesn't matter, which is beyond the law. So that is the Digital Service Act, with a number of important provisions to empower citizens and make sure that they can enforce their rights online. And then the Digital Market Act, which is about every company has the right to compete, even a very, very small company. So there cannot be what we call gatekeeping. I mean, very large companies that has the key to the business and locks companies in their business model. There should be fair competition and chances for every company, also the small companies. The AI rules, which we introduced after 3 years of very intense work, we opened up in the world the idea of human-centric AI. We were the first to do the work with the high-level experts. Then many organizations around the world adopted the European model. But then, frankly, a lot of words, a lot of good intention, but this is the only concrete rule that is put on the table. And of course, it's a rule that waits, because if adopted, it's the rule for the largest market in terms of value of the world. So I think we came with a rather balanced output, which is to regulate when there's risk, and to leave inventors free to do whatever they like when there's no risk. And even with this risk, I mean, most of the practices are okay, but of course, I mean, the documentation about the algorithms, I mean, performance of the algorithms should be explained and should be verified by third parties. And then, as I said, we will go into the issue of identity online, which is a very, very sensitive point. You exist in life if you have an identity. You have the right to interact with public services and other to contract, to sign a contract if you exist. The same is online. The difference is that online you have multiple identities according to the platform you subscribe, which is not ideal. Of course, it's not human-centric. I think what we want is that there should be a unique identity for people protected, and people release the qualities, the attributes that are necessary to actually get the service they want, no more, no less. And this is the European identity scheme that we will propose in a few weeks. And then data. I mean, Ulrike touched on the use of data. I think the use of data, and that's our Data Governance Act, should be, I mean, really encouraged. If data are in possession of public organizations, this data should be shared with researchers, with companies, startups. If citizens want to donate data, and the purpose is clear, and they like to donate data, they should be allowed to do so, but then the organization should be screened, that they actually organize data donation. And if companies want to share data, they don't need to just resort on a large commercial platform to share the data, but they can organize the data sharing with independent data brokers. So that's in a nutshell where we are in terms of regulation. This is indeed, I mean, what is called outside Europe, the Brussels effect, which is to create this environment where the person is at the center of the digital development.
This is indeed great to hear. And as I mentioned at the beginning, this is an area where the EU can really make a difference, both domestically, but also globally. And it's great to hear the important work you do there. Ulrike, if I can come back to you, because there is also the effect of democracy that technology has touched upon. You are currently in London. You experienced firsthand the referendum on the UK's membership of the EU. And of course, there were a lot of questions asked around the campaigns run and the possible manipulation of those campaigns. Same thing happened in the US elections. And we have seen external actors try to infiltrate and influence the democratic process in various places around Europe and the world. What can we do? What can the EU do? What do member states can do to ensure that our democracy is protected and safeguarded against malicious actors who might wish to exploit the technological advantages that the digital realm offers?
Yeah, thanks a lot for that, and I agree that that's a big challenge. I mean, sorry to repeat myself on that, but I genuinely think that, especially when it comes to this kind of manipulation that you alluded to with regard to the Brexit campaign, there were similar discussions with the US, the recent US election, etc. Once again, data privacy plays a big role. Why? Well, because people don't realize what data they're actually sharing and what can be done with this data. Too often I talk to people and say, this all really needs to be private, and they just tell me, but no, I want to share, I'm fine sharing this tweet, or I am on Facebook and I share all these thoughts, and this I know what I'm sharing. but we don't. We absolutely do not, because the whole point is that a lot of things that we are sharing without knowing it can in fact be used and kind of instrumentalized and weaponized, and we are sharing much more than we realize, because it's not just the data, it's not just a sentence we write and put on Facebook that companies are collecting. And so with everything that can indeed be gathered by companies, people can be manipulated. Again, we've had these discussions with regards to the referendum, and so keeping privacy rights high up is definitely helping to kind of rein in this kind of manipulation. And the second element, and here really, the EU is very much doing this, is indeed regulation of such actions. So the AI regulation that just came out does have elements about stopping manipulation, or at least kind of making clear when something is manipulated. We've seen very concerningly the use of deep fakes, AI generated videos that can also impersonate other people, and this kind of manipulation should either be forbidden or indeed just be there should be basically a sign. It should be said that this is what this is, and it doesn't, and it shouldn't pretend to be true. I wanted to pick up just very briefly on one point about the data, because yes, of course, there is data being collected in Europe that can be used, that should be used, especially by public organizations, as was just said. Nevertheless, one thing I've been thinking about quite a lot is artificial intelligence, and the way that it is currently developed does rely quite a lot on so-called big data. So a lot of data is better than little data for the development of artificial intelligence. That being said, there is a question of whether this may change eventually, or at least there is a lot of research being done into what's called data efficiency, or just kind of basically trying to have AI that is being trained on either less data or indeed artificially created data. I don't want to go into too much detail, but what I'm saying is that it would be a great idea, in my view, if the Europeans kind of took this apparent disadvantage of having less data than, for example, the Chinese or the Americans, because we collected it less, and kind of turning this into a potential advantage by focusing in particular on the development of what I would now call small data AI, or indeed the generation of data through artificial means. So it's, you don't always need to think something is done in a certain way and you need to follow this path, but Europe has indeed great talent, and this is relatively undisputed when you look at all the studies. Europe has great talent, great people, great researchers that in my view should be encouraged to kind of work on that, because once again this could really become an advantage for the EU and for the Europeans eventually. So that's just an element of thought I wanted to kind of put out there for people to think about.
That's very interesting indeed, actually, and I think we probably need a whole new discussion just to look into that data and the AI and how can we engage. I should also point out perhaps what Ulrike mentioned might have made some people apprehensive about sharing information online. But this is being broadcast on a variety of platforms, and all those watching are welcome to ask questions or offer comments in the relevant section, whether it's on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, or somewhere else where they're watching it. And hopefully, your questions will be safe. Sorry.
And if I may, just because on the kind of comment, I see someone saying, is Ulrike honestly claiming the AI regulation would solve this information? No, of course not. But I'm saying it's an element. There's no. I don't know anyone who says I'm going to solve the problem of disinformation. By the way, because disinformation and propaganda, of course, predates AI and all this technology, by centuries and millennia. Propaganda has always been a thing. So regulating technology, of course, is not going to solve it. But what I am saying is that elements, for example, those elements that are in the AI regulation, can help to limit certain data uses for manipulation and for disinformation. And so that's one element. But no, of course, I'm not claiming that this is the solution.
There you are, a question answered live right away. I didn't even have to ask it myself. If I can come back to you, Roberto, and as I mentioned, this is being broadcast on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube, on Instagram, all platforms, US created and established platforms that perhaps we're not very comfortable with. And every time we see technological innovations in Europe, be it Skype or Spotify or others, quickly those big US giants scoop in and swap it up and buy them up. You've mentioned quite a lot about the investment that the Commission is putting together and the plans that the EU has to support innovation. But I think there is also an appetite to increase the number of EU unicorns, so to say, these really ambitious startups that can generate the innovation that are necessary. How can member states and the EU help foster this environment for more EU unicorns? And should we be supporting European champions in this area, or should we not?
Thanks for your question. And of course, let me say right away that we are not against commercial success of companies. I mean, if the companies respect the rules, I mean, we can only applaud if they have success. And the union is the most open area of the world when it comes to, entrepreneurs wanting to establish and do business in Europe. But of course, respect of rules is very important. Now, our indigenous tech entrepreneurs, I think the plug in Europe has been the risk-averse environment when it comes to investments. I mean, for historical reasons, our banking institution, they reward low risk. I mean, they are trained like this. And of course, here is the other way around in high tech. In high tech, you have to risk. There's nothing wrong in having failures. I mean, you have failures with one idea, then the next one is the good one. It's like, learning to ski. I mean, you have to fall. I mean, the only way to learn to skiing is falling. So why this doesn't happen in Europe? As I said, because of our bit risk-averse mentality in corporate finance. And I think on this, indeed, the public side can help, first of all, in establishing funds in which, we inject capital from the public side, a little bit absorbing this risk, venturing with other financial institutions, creating a new financing vehicles for startups. This, I think, can help a lot. And what helps even more is to really continue and insist on this issue. You have to take risks. Risk is a good thing, and failure is part of the success. This is where I think there's still a lot to work in terms of regulatory approach to financing, in terms of investing in risky ventures, and also in terms of, as I said, corporate approach, corporate mentality, which is a little bit, not really thinking in the future sometimes. But there are good signs, though. We have now a large public offering from the Commission, which is the InvestEU program, which is about, taking risks together with the financing institution on a number of high-tech sectors. We have established in the past investment funds for connectivity. We have established a fund for artificial intelligence and blockchain. We are working with the startup community to make Europe much more startup friendly. So good signs are there. And indeed, as you said, our ambition is also a number of unicorns to double them, or if not triple, in the next 10 years.
I have a question from Joshua, one of our viewers, who is asking, how can local digital hubs benefit from EU funding? It is perhaps a quite specific question, but are there any tips you could offer to Joshua? Roberto, I don't know if you got the question. One of our viewers is asking.
I thought it was for Ulrike, the question, since we are alternating. Okay, yes, of course. As I said, we have this digital innovation apps concept, where local gathering of different, diverse community of startups, established companies, university research centers can actually work together. Let me make an example. I mean, if you have you are a small SME and you want to use a very expensive computer-driven 3D printer for sophisticated industrial printing. First of all, you cannot afford it yourself. Secondly, you don't have the specialized skills, but you can go to a digital innovation hub where the printer will be there, where, people that can use the printer will be there, and you can use it in sharing with others. You can be trained how to use it. And the same applies for many other things which are at the edge of technology, like 3D, virtual reality usage in industry and service industry, AI, and the rest. So co-working, co-investment in certain apps is absolutely welcome, and we have a specific program line in Digital Europe to finance it.
Thank you, and I know you have to be leaving us soon, so I'll come back to Ulrike perhaps for one more question that has come through our audience, and Eileen wants to ask a little bit about military artificial intelligence and whether the EU seems to be more willing to negotiate on that through international treaties rather than blanket regulation. How do you view exactly the way that the EU is approaching it? The question is also on your screen.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, and I saw that Eileen, who by the way also works on these things, so also listen to her ask this. I kind of feel that this is a bit of a very positive reading of what the EU and the Europeans are doing. I kind of understand where you're going with this, but I would argue that if your aim, or if EU's aim, is to negotiate these things in international treaties, and to be honest, there are only so many of these elements that can be and will be negotiated in such treaties. But if this is the goal, then you also just need to kind of lay out your position, right? So basically, it's not saying anything other than I think in the European Defence Fund there is a clause about not wanting to finance lethal autonomous weapon systems, but that's kind of a very minimum statement, if you like. But yeah, so I find this a very positive reading, because it sounds a bit like they're not doing this because they want to do this internationally, and if that's the case, I would still very much advise for Europeans to kind of lay out their thinking. And this is not just something for the EU, and in fact it may even be less for the EU as an organization, so for Brussels, than for member states. I very much want the member states, which after all have the national authority over military power, to engage more with these questions, if only to say, what they do want to negotiate in international treaties, and what they may want to forbid or ban or whatever in the end. But I still believe that there needs to be more coordination and more thinking and more discussion on the European level, also in order for the Europeans to stay together, within the EU, and then possibly also within NATO. Because what we're also seeing, this is something I worry a little bit about, is that we have this creation of different forums on military AI that includes some Europeans and not others. And I don't think that that's something that the EU should be happy with. So that's something I would also keep an eye on, and this would be helped by a more common position, or again, at least discussion.
Wonderful. We could carry on for hours, and I think we will when we should. I encourage all those that are watching to engage on social media. Please raise any other points you have, and I'm sure both our speakers will be keeping an eye in case there's something they need to address. But we're also going to come back to this conversation at a later stage, because obviously the debate is not going to end anytime soon, and this is a huge topic. I would like to thank both of you for taking the time on a very busy Tuesday morning to discuss with us and our viewers. It was a real pleasure to have you with us, and remarkably informative and eye-opening. Many thanks also to all of those who connected one way or the other and followed the conversation and participated in it. Again, I'm sorry we couldn't bring in all the questions raised, but we're going to try to address them through the social media. And please watch the space, follow the European movement and the ECFR on social media, because we're going to be having more discussions like this on a variety of topics, and we would love to have you there with us. In the meantime, have a great day and enjoy the rest of the week. Thank you.